ladies and gentlemen. It was a cool Friday morning in North Hollywood, California. The sun had just begun to rise over the San Fernando Valley, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban streets. Commuters were heading to work, parents were dropping off their children at school, and the Bank of America branch on Laurel Canyon Boulevard had just opened its doors for another seemingly routine day of business. No one knew that within minutes, this peaceful corner of Los Angeles would become the site of one of the most violent and chaotic shootouts in modern American history. There were no warnings, no ominous signs, just the stillness before a storm that would change the way law enforcement responded to high-threat situations forever. At exactly 9:17 a.m., as bank tellers were counting bills and early customers filled out deposit slips, two men clad in black and covered in homemade body armor stepped out of a white Chevrolet Celebrity in the parking lot. They carried duffel bags stuffed with ammunition and high-powered rifles, intent not just on robbing a bank, but prepared to go to war if challenged. Within minutes, the streets would echo with the sound of gunfire. But at that very moment, on the surface, it was just another ordinary day, until it wasn't. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu were not your average bank robbers. These were men who had spent years preparing for something far beyond a simple heist. They weren't desperate criminals acting on impulse. They were meticulous, calculating, and dangerously well-equipped. Phillips, a tall, intimidating figure with a history of violence and a fascination with firearms, met Matasareanu, a Romanian-born electrical engineer with a volatile temper, at a local gym in the early 1990s. Their bond formed over a shared obsession with power, control, and a deep-seated distrust of authority. Together, they evolved into a deadly partnership. They studied police response times, conducted dry runs, and even watched surveillance footage from past robberies to perfect their approach. What set them apart most was their arsenal. These were not mere handguns or simple getaway plans. Phillips and Matasareanu amassed a small armory, fully automatic AK-47s, a -91 Hong Kong dollars rifle, an AR-15 variant, and thousands of rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. Every move they made was designed with the idea of overwhelming anyone who stood in their path. But perhaps the most chilling part of their preparation was their body armor. Layered from head to toe in homemade ballistic protection, they created near-impenetrable suits that covered their torsos, legs, and even arms. This wasn't just protection, it was a calculated advantage. They were ready to take bullets and keep moving forward. To law enforcement, they would soon appear less like criminals and more like soldiers, cold, methodical, and completely unafraid of confrontation. And on that February morning, they stepped out of their vehicle with purpose, ready to test their deadly preparations in the heart of a bustling American neighborhood. The time was precisely 9:17 a.m. when the first move was made. The white Chevrolet Celebrity rolled to a halt in the parking lot of the Bank of America branch on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. Inside the car sat two figures clad in black, both outfitted in heavy tactical gear, their bodies shielded in layers of homemade body armor that stretched from neck to ankle. This was not a robbery fueled by desperation. It was a mission orchestrated with military precision. Larry Phillips Jr. stepped out first, scanning the surroundings with cold efficiency. He gripped a fully automatic Norinco Type 56, a Chinese variant of the AK-47, loaded with armor-piercing rounds. His partner, Emil Matasareanu, emerged from the passenger side, carrying a -91 Hong Kong dollars rifle, equally powerful and equally deadly. They moved in unison, calm and methodical, each step rehearsed countless times in preparation for this very moment. As they approached the entrance of the bank, inside, employees were just settling into their routines. Tellers counted cash drawers, managers reviewed schedules, and early customers waited patiently in line, unaware that they were seconds away from becoming hostages in a meticulously planned assault. Phillips and Matasareanu burst through the glass doors with calculated aggression. Their faces were obscured by ski masks, and their weapons were raised with unwavering focus. One of them immediately fired a burst into the ceiling, a psychological tactic designed to paralyze the room with fear. Screams rang out as people dropped to the floor, the sudden eruption of violence shattering the morning calm in an instant. They took control of the room with terrifying speed, shouting commands, They forced customers and employees to the ground, brandishing their weapons with practiced authority. Within moments, they moved toward the vault, demanding cash, threatening anyone who dared move. This wasn't a smash-and-grab job. They knew exactly how much time they had before law enforcement would arrive, and they intended to use every second of it. What the robbers didn't know, however, was that outside, a silent alarm had already been triggered. A witness had seen them loading weapons from the trunk before entering the building and had made a quick 911 call. The LAPD was already on its way to A.S. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Mataserino moved through the Bank of America branch with ruthless precision. Time was already working against them. Unknown to the robbers, their presence had not gone unnoticed. Moments before they entered the building, a vigilant bystander, alerted by the sight of two men in tactical gear loading high-powered rifles from the trunk of a car, picked up a phone and dialed 911. His calm but urgent words to the dispatcher would become the first link in a chain of events that would escalate into one of the most violent gunfights in U.S. history. Simultaneously, a silent alarm had been triggered inside the bank. Without a single word spoken, an invisible distress signal was sent out, alerting law enforcement that something was wrong. That dual warning, the call and the alarm, meant that the LAPD had an early jump. Within minutes, the first units were dispatched and racing toward the scene. Officer William Krolak and his partner were among the first to arrive. They had little information, only that a robbery was in progress and that the suspects were possibly armed. What they encountered as they neared the intersection of Laurel Canyon Boulevard and Archwood Street was unlike anything they had prepared for in training. From a distance, they could already see shadows moving inside the bank, but they had no idea that those shadows were armored men wielding weapons powerful enough to pierce through cars, walls, and even their own bulletproof vests. As additional units closed in, they began to take strategic positions around the perimeter. Traffic was stopped, civilians were moved back, and officers crouched behind patrol cars, drawing their service pistols and shotguns, tools they would soon find woefully inadequate for the battle ahead. Communication over the radio crackled with tension. Dispatchers relayed that the suspects were heavily armed, possibly with automatic weapons. Officers who had responded to countless robberies before could already sense this was different. There was no negotiating, no hostage crisis unfolding with demands. This felt more like a tactical standoff with enemies who were ready and willing to fight. From the outside, the bank was still intact, glass unbroken, walls standing. But behind those walls, violence had already erupted, and officers knew it was only a matter of time before the confrontation spilled out into the streets. They had no idea just how unprepared they were for what was about to unfold. At 9:24 a.m., the glass doors of the Bank of America burst open, and with them, hell was unleashed on the streets of North Hollywood. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Mataserino stepped outside, weapons in hand, walking into the sunlight with the cold confidence of men who had prepared for this very moment. What followed was not a robbery escape. It was an armed confrontation of staggering intensity, one that would be broadcast live to millions and leave an indelible scar on the American psyche. Gunfire erupted almost immediately. Phillips, gripping a fully automatic Norinco Type 56, unleashed a relentless barrage of bullets toward LAPD patrol cars. His rounds tore through metal and glass with terrifying ease. Mataserino, wielding in -91 Hong Kong dollars, sprayed the surrounding area with firepower that echoed through the neighborhood like thunder. The noise was deafening, the visuals surreal, like a scene torn from a war film, but it was real, and it was happening in broad daylight on city streets. Officers took cover behind anything they could find: patrol cars, trees, nearby walls, returning fire with pistols and shotguns that were utterly ineffective against the robbers' heavy body armor. Bullets struck with no effect as the robbers walked calmly and deliberately, reloading with efficiency and confidence, seemingly impervious to pain or panic. Sparks flew as rounds ricocheted off sidewalks and storefronts. Cars ignited, windows shattered, and civilians screamed as they ran for shelter. The gunmen were mobile, moving between vehicles and firing at any sign of law enforcement. Phillips even took a moment to stop, adjust his rifle, and reload. Out in the open, with bullets flying all around him, he wasn't afraid. He was in control. and that terrified the officers facing him. Radio traffic exploded with desperate calls. "We need heavier firepower. We're pinned down." Officers hit. Within the first few minutes, multiple officers had been wounded. Civilians caught in the crossfire ducked behind cars or lay flat on sidewalks, paralyzed by the storm of bullets raining through the neighborhood. Over the course of the next 44 minutes, more than 2,000 rounds would be exchanged between the robbers and law enforcement. Tactical units scrambled to get to the scene, but the situation was already spiraling. Every minute brought a new injury, a new close call, a new explosion of glass or gunfire. The entire scene had transformed from a robbery into a full-scale urban firefight, and the city of Los Angeles found itself watching, some from nearby windows, others through live TV feeds. As their streets became a battlefield as the first waves of gunfire exploded across North Hollywood, it became alarmingly clear to everyone on the scene. The Los Angeles Police Department was dangerously outgunned. Officers crouched behind patrol cars that were being shredded by automatic fire, gripping their standard-issue 9mm Berettas and .38 revolvers, tools that might have been adequate for ordinary confrontations, but were now almost useless against two heavily armed and armored assailants. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu had come prepared for war. They were equipped with high-capacity magazines, armor-piercing rounds, and fully automatic rifles that could spit bullets faster than the police could return fire. Worse still, their homemade body armor absorbed or deflected most of the rounds being fired at them, rendering the LAPD's standard weapons not just underpowered, but nearly obsolete in the face of such overwhelming force. As officers exchanged fire with the robbers, panic and frustration began to mount. Some found themselves pinned down behind their vehicles, completely unable to move under the rain of gunfire. Radio calls became increasingly urgent. Officers shouted into their mics for backup, requesting rifles, armored vehicles, anything that could help close the deadly firepower gap that was putting their lives and the lives of civilians at severe risk. At one point, in a desperate act of improvisation, several officers made a daring move. They rushed into a nearby gun store, B&B Sales, just blocks away from the firefight. With the store owner's permission, they borrowed high-powered AR-15s and other semi-automatic rifles, anything capable of penetrating body armor or at least providing suppressing fire. These were not standard police tactics. These were battlefield decisions made in the heat of combat by men and women who were trying to survive an unprecedented onslaught. Even with the borrowed rifles, the balance did not immediately shift. The officers had no time for strategy, no rehearsed plan to follow. Every move was reactive. Every shot was a bid to slow down gunmen who had no intention of surrendering. It wasn't just about stopping the robbers anymore. It was about staying alive until reinforcements could arrive with heavier firepower. The robbers' bullets tore through buildings, injured civilians, and struck over a dozen officers. Still, the LAPD held the line, repositioning, trying to flank, using what little cover the urban landscape could provide. But they knew, deep down, that this was a defining moment, an encounter that would expose painful truths about police preparedness and ignite a national conversation about how law enforcement confronts militarized threats in a civilian setting. As bullets screamed through the streets and the thunder of automatic fire echoed off buildings, the city of North Hollywood, usually a place of morning routines, neighborhood shops, and school drop-offs, descended into chaos. For the civilians caught in the middle of the shootout, this wasn't just a police standoff. It was an unimaginable nightmare unfolding in real time, right outside their doors. Parents driving their children to school slammed on their brakes as gunfire erupted. Shoppers ducked behind parked cars, clutching their loved ones, praying they wouldn't be struck by stray rounds. Employees in nearby businesses threw themselves to the ground as bullets pierced windows and shattered glass. One man walking his dog Dove behind a bush, unsure if he would make it out alive. Another woman, just steps from the bank when the gunman emerged, barely managed to run to cover as bullets ricocheted around her. The sound of gunfire was relentless. It wasn't a few shots. It was sustained, thundering bursts that rattled nerves and shattered the sense of safety that once defined this part of Los Angeles. Overhead, news helicopters began circling, broadcasting the event live to millions. But for the people on the ground, There was no time to process the surreal nature of what was happening. They were focused on one thing: survival. Inside their homes, residents lay flat on the floor, away from windows, holding their children close. Some called loved ones. Others called 911, not to report the crime, but to plead for help, to ask if it was safe to move, or to confirm that what they were hearing wasn't a war, but a robbery. What made this more terrifying was the indiscriminate nature of the danger. The robbers fired in all directions, toward officers, toward patrol cars, even into buildings. Their bullets didn't care who was in the way. People as far as 2 blocks away reported hearing the terrifying sound of rounds zipping past them or striking walls and trees nearby. No one felt safe. No one could predict where the next bullet would land. The psychological toll was immense. For those huddled in fear, every minute felt like an eternity. They could hear the police shouting, hear the chaos outside, but had no idea when, or if, it would end. Children cried, adults trembled, and everyone felt the helplessness of being caught between 2 forces, neither of which could guarantee their safety. And through it all, the realization settled in. The streets of a peaceful neighborhood had become a war zone, and the people who lived and worked there were now unwilling participants in a battle they never saw coming. As the firefight raged on and the minutes ticked by, the realization rippled through the ranks of the LAPD. Standard patrol officers were not going to be enough to end this confrontation. The robbers were too heavily armed, too well-armored, and too determined. Dozens of officers had already engaged, firing hundreds of rounds to little effect. The time had come for a more specialized response. A call went out across the city: activate SWAT. The Special Weapons and Tactics (SWAT) team was mobilized immediately, and officers rushed to the scene with urgency. These were men trained for high-risk confrontations, hostage situations, and armed standoffs, but even they had never faced adversaries quite like Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Mataserino. The 2 robbers weren't just holding ground. They were moving, adapting, exchanging fire with confidence and precision. When the SWAT team arrived, they brought with them what the patrol officers desperately lacked: heavier firepower, better body armor, and battlefield tactics. Armed with AR-15s, M16s, and other high-caliber rifles capable of penetrating light cover, the SWAT units fanned out, taking strategic positions across the area. They didn't just react, they coordinated. Communications between units became tighter. Positions were flanked. Fire zones were established. The LAPD was no longer just trying to hold the line. They were beginning to press forward. But even for SWAT, the conditions were brutal. The robbers' automatic rifles raked the streets with unrelenting fury. Visibility was limited by smoke, dust, and the chaos of sirens and screaming civilians. Bullets cracked past officers' helmets, shattered windows above their heads, and tore through the bodywork of squad cars like paper. Yet despite the intensity, the tactical teams held firm. One key maneuver came as SWAT officers began to anticipate the robbers' movements. Phillips and Mataserino were not static. They moved between cover points, adjusting their firing positions, even advancing through parking lots and alleyways in search of escape. Using intelligence relayed from helicopters above and officers on the ground, SWAT began to contain them, boxing them into smaller and smaller spaces, forcing them away from open terrain and into more controlled zones. Still, it was far from over. The gunmen continued to fire, and their seemingly impenetrable body armor made every encounter more dangerous. SWAT snipers struggled to find weak points in the robbers' defenses, aiming for limbs, hands, and occasionally heads, trying to land disabling shots without putting civilians or officers at greater risk. And even as LAPD tactics began to tighten, the robbers remained aggressive. They were not fleeing in fear. They were still pushing forward, determined to shoot their way out, using cars for cover, spraying rounds in all directions, and even taunting officers at times. It wasn't just a robbery gone wrong anymore. It was a sustained battle of attrition, with lives on the line, and the tactical units were the thin wall between chaos and control. The North Hollywood shootout was more than just a violent confrontation. It became a watershed moment that exposed critical vulnerabilities in law enforcement tactics, equipment, and preparedness. In the immediate aftermath, the LAPD and police departments across the United States were forced to confront a stark reality. Traditional police gear and standard protocols were ill-equipped to handle heavily armed criminals prepared for combat. The images broadcast from that day, officers pinned behind their patrol cars, firing pistols and shotguns ineffectively at robbers clad in body armor and wielding automatic rifles, sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. It sparked urgent debates about the need for better weaponry, improved protective gear, and comprehensive training for officers facing increasingly militarized threats. One of the most significant changes to emerge from the tragedy was the accelerated adoption of patrol rifles within police departments. No longer would officers have to rely solely on handguns and shotguns. Instead, departments began equipping patrol officers with AR-15 style rifles capable of penetrating body armor and providing superior range and accuracy. These rifles quickly became standard issue, fundamentally shifting how police approached armed confrontations. Beyond equipment, the shootout triggered a paradigm shift in police training and tactics. Departments expanded their focus on active shooter and high-intensity shootout scenarios, implementing realistic drills and simulations designed to prepare officers for situations that once seemed rare or unlikely. The emphasis on rapid, coordinated responses and communication between units became paramount, reducing the time it took to contain and neutralize threats. The event also underscored the importance of specialized tactical units. While SWAT teams existed prior to the shootout, their role was redefined and expanded. Police departments across the country invested more resources into these units, enhancing their training, equipment, and rapid deployment capabilities to ensure they could respond swiftly to similar threats. Public perception of policing was also impacted. The shootout highlighted the bravery and resilience of officers who risked their lives in an unprecedented firefight, but it also sparked discussions about police militarization, a debate that continues to evolve today. Communities grappled with balancing the need for effective law enforcement against concerns about the escalation of force. The North Hollywood shootout became a case study in police academies and tactical training centers worldwide. Its lessons shaped policies and procedures for decades to come, influencing everything from patrol car equipment to interagency cooperation during crises. It remains a stark reminder of how one moment of violence can reshape an entire institution. The North Hollywood shootout was not just a violent chapter in Los Angeles history. It was a pivotal moment that forever transformed policing across the United States. It exposed the harsh realities officers face when confronted with extreme violence and highlighted the urgent need for evolution in law enforcement tactics, equipment, and training. The bravery shown by those officers amidst overwhelming odds remains a testament to their dedication and sacrifice. Today, thanks to the hard lessons learned on those chaotic streets, police departments are better prepared, better equipped, and better trained to protect their communities from similar threats. While the scars of that day still linger, the legacy of the North Hollywood shootout is one of resilience and progress, proof that even in the darkest moments, change is possible and lives can be saved.